everyone, it's Mrs. Thomas, and I'm going to read you a story called The Curious Garden. And to me, it talks about how, remember we've been talking about how Jesus was one person, and then he chose 12 disciples, and he would speak to everyone. He'd speak to his disciples, and then his disciples told the stories that Jesus had shared with them, and they shared it with other people, and how Jesus lived in the Middle East, and here we are in the United States, which is so far away, and we're so many years later, and we know about Jesus, and we know about the stories that he told. So we've talked about how one little thing can grow and grow and grow, and how different ways it can happen. And so as I'm reading the story, I want you to think about different ways that you might be able to start one thing and make it grow. Like maybe you have one Lego and you build a whole building with other Legos. Or if, for instance, you see a nest, a bird's nest, and you think about how a bird made that nest and then laid some eggs in it, and then the eggs hatched, and then the birds grew up and they became big birds, and how they grew feathers. Look at this feather I found on my way back from St. David's this morning. Look, isn't that beautiful? It's a blue jay's feather. I hope you can see it. Can you see the beautiful blue that it is? Look at that. If I hold something behind it, you can see the pattern. So that's an example how one thing started as a nest, and then it grew into a bird that lost a feather that I got to pick up and I got to share with you all. See how it all connects? So this is called The Curious Garden, and I got to hear the author at the Baltimore Book Festival years ago, so he signed it. And he's the author and the illustrator. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside, even on drizzly days, while everyone else stayed inside. You could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. There he is. I love this book too, because instead of the pages being like this all the time, sometimes it's the top half and then the bottom half. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, when he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the cracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped out onto the railway. Let me show you where the staircase was. See, I think that's where the staircase was. So we ran that way and up through that, up to the top, and out this door. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last thing he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned to the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. Look, he poured water. Didn't work out so well. He flooded it a little bit. He pruned off the dead things, because you have to take off the dead things in order for something to grow. And look, it's all growing now. And sometimes people say that if you sing to your plants, they will grow really nicely. So he's singing. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the curious garden explored every corner of the railway. Look, it's growing. Look, isn't it beautiful? And look, here it is. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit the plants. Look, they've got their sleds out though. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for spring. What do you do when you're trying to learn something? Look, he's reading a book about gardens. And look, he's getting all of his supplies together. His book is in there, and he's got a wheelbarrow. After the 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Winter had taken a toll on the garden, but thanks to Liam's planting, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by the more delicate plants. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. What's that? That's a car. And look at that. A tree is popping out of a building. A few plants popped out where they didn't belong. What's that? And hiding underneath there. See that shape? That's a stop sign. A few plants popped out where they didn't belong. Oop, I read that before. There's another. It's a fire hydrant. Others mysteriously popped up all at once. Look, Liam is planting in different people's pots and giving them a present. He's surprising them. He's got on his spy glasses. But the most surprising things that popped up were the new gardens. Look, it's not only on the high railway, on the high line, but also on the buildings. And look, all these children are gardening. So he spread it, he started, and now other people are doing it throughout the city and other children. And look, that's a garden of sunflowers. See how it's all spreading? Just like that one nest that I showed you, where the bird made it and then put an egg in it, and the egg hatched, and it grew, and then it grew feathers, and then the feather fell out off of the bird, and I found it, and I shared it with you. Look, the steps have grass on it. They're having a picnic. Look, even the pier has grass on it and a garden. And look, giant lily pads. And a topiary. He's cut the bushes into different shapes of animals. And look, even between these tall buildings, there's a tree, and look what's inside of it. A tree house. How cool is that? And now somebody is painting a painting of the garden. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed, but of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite was where it all began. And look, there's Liam as a grown-up, and there are his children. And I think that might be his wife. And they're all helping together. And look, here it is. Now, I want you all to listen to this, because even though this is a made-up story about a boy named Liam starting a garden, you're going to find out that even stories that are made up, they start in our minds from something real that we've read. So here we go. Author's note. This is by the author. He wrote a note to all of us. It often seems impossible for nature to thrive in a city of concrete and brick and steel. But the more I've traveled and the closer I've looked at the world around me, the more I've realized that nature is always eagerly exploring the places we've forgotten. You can find flowers and fields and even small forests growing wild in every city. You just have to look for them. On the west side of Manhattan, New York City, where I grew up for a little bit, there is an old elevated, that means high up, railway called the High Line. Its trains rumbled high above the city streets for decades. But in 1980, the High Line was shut down and forgotten. Without people and trains getting in the way, nature was free to redecorate. Over the years, the rusty rails and gravel slowly gave way to wildflowers and trees, and if you look at the railway today, you'll see a lush garden that curves above the streets and between buildings. From grass bursting through cracks in a sidewalk, or a tuft of goldenrod, that's a type of plant, a type of flower, clinging to a brick wall, to a meadow winding along an abandoned railway, nature can thrive in the unlikeliest of places. All of this made me curious. What would happen if an entire city decided to truly cooperate with nature? How would that city change? How would it all begin? Peter Brown. And that's how he got the idea of Liam and the curious garden that he started. And I've sent some photos, a photo to your parents of Isabel standing on a balcony on a patio at the Whitney Museum when Isabel and I went last year in the fall. And down below you can see trees, and you'll see it's part of the High Line, which is what this story is told about. And I've written some suggestions about different things that you might do that start small and grow big, like building Legos. You can paint a painting. You can start a fundraiser. And there's an NPR piece about a 6-year-old girl who raised money, starting with her tooth that she lost and the $5 that she got from it. And now she's raised, I think, $215,000 for the Oakland Zoo that she heard was going to be closing because it was running out of money because there weren't any visitors right now because of the coronavirus, and it had to shut down. And she started with her tooth and the $5 that she got from it, and now she's raised $215,000 for the Oakland Zoo. Amazing, right? So, lots of love, and I'll see you soon.